Another one bites the dust. And another one gone. And another one gone. Another one bites the dust. Hey, Blue Beetle, we gonna get you too. Another one bites the dust. Maybe Warner Brothers should retitle Blue Beetle to Kind of Blue, because that's how they have to be feeling after this fourth flop in a row for the final lap of the DC Extended Universe. As many expected, Blue Beetle tanked at the box office. From The Hollywood Reporter, quote, Blue Beetle opened to an estimated $25.4 million in North America. It remains to be seen how much Tropical Storm Hilary dampens grosses in Los Angeles, the film's top market, and other parts of the Southwest, but Warner Brothers expects the impact to be significant. Overseas, the film took in $18 million from 63 markets for a global start of $43.4 million. It's understandable why the superhero pick may be feeling a little blue. Not only did Blue Beetle come in behind expectations, heading into the weekend, tracking had suggested $28 million to $32 million, but it also posted one of the lowest openings among any title in the DC Extended Universe not adjusted for inflation. Oh, it's not one of the lowest, it's the lowest opening for any of the DCEU films with regular releases. Wonder Woman 1984 and The Suicide Squad were streamed on HBO Max and had limited theatrical releases, so their box office draws aren't a true reflection of how the films would have performed. If you look at the movies that had normal releases, Blue Beetle is the lowest. Whether the tropical storm effects turn out in California is up for grabs, but that doesn't explain the rest of the markets. I think the explanation is that people are tired of the Snyderverse movies, as I've said before, and that Warner Brothers made a mistake by telling everyone that they were rebooting the DC franchise when they still had 5 movies on the slate. It also doesn't help that 2 of the movies introduced new characters, and one of them starred a budding sociopath, allegedly. All they've got left is Jason Momoa in Aquaman 2, and I'm sure some of the ladies might turn out to see Big Sexy, but the chances of that movie doing well at this point are pretty low. Collider brings this up, quote, However, it's clear that the average moviegoer is no longer interested in watching more installments of a franchise that has been publicly put in the rearview mirror. This doesn't bode too well for December's Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, which is ostensibly the final film of the old DCEU era. Under the supervision of James Gunn and Peter Safran, the DCEU will be relaunched in 2025 with Superman Legacy. Now, it's possible Aquaman 2 will do well. It's also possible that Blue Beetle could have a comeback like Elemental. It's just not very likely. For Blue Beetle in particular, it's got to make up its $100 million budget and probably the same amount or more in marketing because it was plastered everywhere. The chances of it coming up with $400 to $500 million is pretty slim. That usually doesn't happen, which is the reason why I assume that Elemental was done. You rarely see a comeback like that. It just seems like WB set themselves up to fail. The powers that be clearly have had a problem with the direction of the film since Man of Steel, so literally right out the gate. But instead of fixing it, they let Zack Snyder do his thing, then messed with his finished films, then had everybody else copy his style, then tried to bring in MCU humor, and then begrudgingly let Snyder finish his cut of the Justice League. That should have been the end of it. If they didn't like the direction the franchise had taken, they could have ended the Snyderverse right there, hired Gunn and Safran, and rebooted everything. Instead, they kept making films in that universe. All but Blue Beetle were filmed in 2021, so I can understand WB not wanting to scrap the movies after pouring at least $500 million into 4 of them. But that doesn't explain why they told people that Gunn and Safran were going to reboot everything. They could have just brought those guys in as the new team leading the franchise, let the 5 movies come out and do their thing, and then announced that they were rebooting the line after Aquaman 2. Of course, it would also help if they were clear about what they were rebooting. A reboot implies that you're scrapping what exists to restart it, but WB is on record saying Ezra Miller would still be the Flash. James Gunn said that there's still going to be a second season for Peacemaker. Then there was Gal Gadot saying that she and Gunn had talked and that Wonder Woman 3 was back on, but apparently now it's back off. You know, when I made that Chinatown joke, I didn't know they were actually going to do it for real. It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. Make up your minds. Speaking of making up your minds, Jason Momoa's Aquaman status is still in limbo. And then there's the recent Superman news, where apparently Gunn's Superman Legacy film won't be about a young Superman, even though he pretty much implied that it would. From The Hollywood Reporter, quote, James Gunn is making a Superman movie with a younger actor than former Man of Steel Henry Cavill, but that doesn't mean that he's making a young Superman movie per se. The writer, director, and DC Studios co-chief took to threads to clarify something that's been an assumption about Superman Legacy, and the reason he shifted leads from Cavill, who is 40, to David Corenswet, who is 30. A fan asked Gunn if his Young Superman movie is set in the past. Gunn replied, "I was never making a young Superman movie, just a Superman movie." To be fair, part of the reason fans assumed his story was going to be a youthful portrayal was a comment from Gunn himself about why he recast the role. He wrote on Twitter in December, "In the initial stages, our story will be focusing on an earlier part of Superman's life, so the character will not be played by Henry Cavill." Right. So keep in mind that in Man of Steel, Superman is 33 years old, and he didn't become Superman until he was that age. So if Gunn is making a film about the earlier parts of Superman's life, Clark would have to be under 30, probably in his mid-20s, ergo vis-a-vis concordantly, it's a young Superman movie. All of this is so confusing, and it's so unnecessary, and it could easily backfire on Gunn and WB by souring people on the reboot before anything even comes out. This is one of those cases where if you don't have to tell this to the public, just don't say anything. It's better to leave people wondering than to keep giving them tidbits that you have to keep taking back. Unless the next DC hero in the line is the Indian Giver, you might want to stop. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.